Hello, Extra Time.
You're applying to the league not to get a high because it damages your reputation. It makes people, when they read it, just laugh at you.
Simple look, they're playing in the League One and they're playing in the Europa League and they're credit and the game in this country. Maybe we should get Stephen Keaney then to manage the Irish team.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Extratime Football Podcast. Your host is Donal Ryan, Macdara Ferris and Paula here. Great lads, how are we?
Good, Luke, thanks.
Hey Luke,
Only one place really start this week, and that was the return of Noel King, and a winning return for Noel King to the League of Ireland. 2-0 win over Bohemians. Paul, what's your initial thoughts on the game?
Dundalk were really, really good, actually. I was very impressed by them. I've seen them, saw them the opening night of the season against Shamrock Rovers, thought they looked decent, thought they had a bit of steel about them, and then obviously the wheels kind of came off over the last, the next sort of whatever it was, 8, 9, 10 games. But I've watched some of the games back on LOI TV, all right, but I hadn't seen a huge amount of them live in recent weeks. But quite a few of the Dundalk sort of people around the club, fans, the media who covered Dundalk, players, they were sort of certainly saying after the match on Friday night that they felt performances had been improving in recent weeks. And they certainly looked like a team with plenty about them the other night. Like, it was real weird, I mentioned it in my match report. It was a strange one in Oriel Park because it was kind of a night of firsts in that it's Noel King's first game in charge. It's Noel King's first win as manager. Dundalk scored their first home goal of the season as well, and recorded their first win of the season. Which is kind of mad when you think about it. It's 11, 12 games into the season. But yeah, they were really good value for their win. Kind of tore into Bohs, and Bohs were like in good form. I think 3 wins in a row, chasing a 4th win in a row, but they never got going. Bohs, Dundalk just ripped into them, and it was kind of some of the old guard of the Bohs sort of set up that were 2-4. Daryl Horban was brilliant on the left wing. Robbie Benson was very influential. Andy Boyle was very influential at centre back, and John Mountney on the right wing. After all his injury problems that he's had, Mountney was outstanding, I thought. It was kind of the four lads from the Stephen Keaney era of Dundalk, and for 20, 25 minutes they kind of almost played like a Stephen Keaney team, just wave after wave of attack, and they scored 2 cracking goals. Scott Hyde's goal was brilliant. Robbie Benson's goal was lovely as well. Both sort of long, both from outside the box, and yeah, they were full value for the win. In Noel King's first game in charge, although it was interesting that King, who had obviously been appointed that week, and much to the shock of everybody, including himself, but he sat in the corner of the dugout. Brian Gartland kind of ran the line as such. Liam Burns, first team coach, was sort of up and down to Gartland, and would be sort of dealing with a lot of the set pieces and stuff. But the 2 lads, Gartland and Burns, would sort of go back over to the corner of the dugout and consult with King on a couple of things. But I think it was the 91st minute, the first time that I saw Noel King standing up, in terms of on the touchline, what have you. So he said to us afterwards that he'll take a back seat, get to know all the players, get to know the names, that he didn't want to be sort of standing on the sideline confusing people if he wasn't getting the names of some new faces right. And he more or less said as well that if the Gartland Burns dynamic is going to produce a few results, that he's no issue kind of having that slightly backseat role in it all either. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because it was such a left field appointment.
Paul, does that not, I suppose, in your own opinion, what does that say about his appointment there in the first place? Like, if he's happy to kind of keep Burns and Gartland there and to kind of help him, like, does it kind of undermine his position there at all, do you think? Or like, what's the point in having him there then?
Yeah, I think it was probably just the first game in. I'd say it might be slightly different against Shelbourne this Friday. He did say to us afterwards that he's no issue with Gartland and Liam Burns having a kind of a more vocal role, let's say, on match night if it helps the team. But I suspect that was just first game, very much still getting to know the players. Gartland would have taken training during the week last week. King was obviously around the whole setup. So I do think it's just a little bit of a, rather than just jumping straight back into it, having been Now, look, there's been a lot made that he hasn't managed a men's team in the League of Ireland since Finn Harps in 2003. But he has managed plenty of other teams in the meantime, including Shelbourne Women's, which wasn't that long ago. So it's not really a case that he's kind of easing his way back into things. It is a case that he's easing his way back into things, but I can't imagine he will play that sort of backseat driver role for too much longer. But I do think that Gartland and Burns will, by the looks of it, will have a fairly considerable say in how things are going as well.
It's interesting, Paul, you mentioned there about kind of maybe going back to what Dundalk were maybe famous for, that kind of quick attacking football, and obviously the link between Brian Gartland and you mentioned Stephen Kenny. Like that, was that maybe part of maybe Gartland's thinking, was just to go back to what's worked for them for so long in terms of how they played over the last, say, 8-9 years. Maybe that's going back to what they were good at, and that's kind of that quick attacking football wing play, because especially the two goals came from wing play on the right hand side.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, like they've had, I think the kind of Achilles heel for Dundalk, and I do get why they've had to do it over the years, but like it's just been the constant high turnover of players. Like they had 11 new signings, I think it is, in this season. No other teams are in the same boat. I think Pats have 11 new signings in this season as well, and has it immediately worked for St. Pat's? No, it hasn't. They're striving for consistency and are very inconsistent at the moment. And Dundalk's sort of problems have been a bit more kind of stark than that, in that they hadn't been able to buy a win for love nor money. But it'd be interesting. There was a lot of talk in the post-match stuff, not so much from Noel King, but a little bit from Noel King, but mainly from Daryl Horgan, who a few of us interviewed after the game, and he was making the point that nobody at the club has been good enough this season, and they can't shy away from that. But that it was all well and good, kind of blitz and bows 2-0 and at Oriel Park. They could have won by more, by the way. They could have won 4 or 5-0. 4-0 would not have flattered them. They were that good sort of value for their win. But it's all about backing it up now. They have another home game this weekend. Really good game against the league leaders. It's about backing it up and seeing, can they do it. The one thing that struck me from the game, I know we all kind of look at that Oriel Park pitch and roll our eyes at times because it's not in great nick. But I was really struck by how poor the surface was last Friday night. Just looking at it, the bounce of the ball has always been kind of strange on that pitch, just by the very nature of it being an artificial pitch. But I've never seen, like, some of the balls, that were dropping out of the sky and just sort of bouncing. They took on a life of their own at times, on the pitch. And I don't know if it's doing Dundalk. Like, people always say, well, Dundalk playing that pitch and it might be an advantage to them, but I don't know how that pitch is an advantage to anybody. It's just such crazy to the ball.
Yeah, and I suppose it's was it last Monday, the Shells game as well, that kind of dominated the headlines post-match in terms of Talga Park's pitch as well. And then that is probably another issue might come back to later on. I think he did write about it last week. Just before we move on from Noel King, Paul, we were chatting last week to James Rogers, obviously covers Dundalk extensively with his work up in Loud. What was your own reaction to the Noel King appointment? I imagine it was one of shock too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually off last weekend. The weekend before when it kind of broke. I was away at a family event. So I think I remember checking my phone quite late one night and just seeing tweets and the odd text message from WhatsApp messages from people going, "Is this real?" And because I think the news had kind of broken that Friday night, maybe after games, that he was on the verge of being appointed. Look, it's a huge shock, isn't it? And so much so that it shocked a lot of people in the club itself and people who were actively involved in the recruitment process for Stephen O'Donnell's successor. Like, depending on who you talk to, the club were still, in conversations with other candidates when this was announced. So it's very much a solo effort by the owner, Brian Ainscough. And, he does have a relationship with Noel King going back a long time. And, maybe he felt something really left field was needed to kind of wake Dundalk and get them going again. But, I know Noel King at his unveiling press conference ahead of that game on the Friday earlier in the week, he was making the point that he didn't know what sort of reception he would get at Oriel Park. And the PA announcer, as the teams were coming out onto the pitch, the PA announcer sort of more than one, 2 or 3 times kind of tried to whip up a bit of a frenzy and, here's your new manager, Noel King. And, there was definitely round of applause. And I think King earlier in the week had joked about, he might get a few boos and stuff like that. There was nothing like that at all. But to say it was kind of an off the charts reception wouldn't be accurate. It was fairly muted stuff, sort of a reserved sort of round of applause. But then again, by full time, King definitely, I looked down at the dugout to see what sort of reaction he give the final whistle, and he definitely sort of, a bit of a punch in the air, and and there was a bit of backslapping going on with him and Gartland and Burns. So look, it was a team effort on the night, but definitely a surprise appointment, like about as left field as it gets in this league. And when you think about Dundalk and some of the left field appointments that they've had. Sorry, his name has just completely slipped. The Italian guy,
Filippo Ginioli.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, that how left field was that, and a lot of the sort of trials and tribulations that club has had with its American owners in the past. But look, Noel King can only, he's in the position. I think it came as a shock to him, and by all accounts, it's a decent deal. It's 18 months, and I don't think really if it all goes Pete Tong and it all goes disastrously wrong, I don't think it's going to be on Noel King. I think it'll be on the owner. And I think that was certainly, from talking to a couple of people up there before kickoff in the Bows match, that was certainly the impression that I was getting from a few people, that this is very much on the owner if this goes badly.
Yeah, and I suppose he did say in his press conference pretty much last week that the one way to win fans over, his only mission is to get results, and he started the party in the best possible way, was to get a 2-0 win against Bows. Go to one of Noel King's former clubs now, the Shamrock Rovers, Macdara. Would you say a mixed weekend for Rovers over the 3-day period? Obviously drawn Friday night against Galway, always a difficult game in terms of playing John Caulfield's sides, and then obviously a comfortable win on Monday night as we record on Tuesday.
Yeah, they picked up 4 points from the doubleheader. I think we spoke last week, maybe Rovers are on a run of 3 weeks in a row of these Friday, Monday matches. So they got 4 points in the away from home ones the previous week, 3 points away to Derry and point away to Talca Park, but Shelburne and Talca Park. But this was 4 points at home against, two of the teams that the expectation is that Rovers would win. But they didn't play particularly well against Galway on the Friday night, and I was talking to Stephen Bradley after the game, and he didn't quite throw his players under the bus, Damien Duff style, but he talked about, just to quote him, it looked to me that we had a few players that got really comfortable understanding that the squad is tight at the moment, and that comes back to the fact that they have 10 outfield players that are missing. Dan Cleary was suspended last Friday. He came back, but then Rory Gaffney was out last night. So I think Bradley got the reaction that he wanted between the Friday and Monday, and I think they'd certainly been looking for 6 points from those games. But I think 4 is very important. Ahead of the the game against Drogheda was a rearranged game due to the snow, which has kind of just thrown another bit of fixture congestion in. Like I put up a tweet kind of listing out the players Rovers are missing, and Bradley, when I talked to him after, said that team that went out on the pitch was good enough to win that match or any match in the league. So he wasn't playing the poor mate on the injuries, but it is pretty amazing the amount that they have at the minute, and with 64% of the games are all played before this mid-season break, which is on during the Euros. It's really important that Rovers are looking to go deep in the season. They're looking to, be playing at least 4 rounds in Europe. If they win their first round, they'll be guaranteed 4 rounds in Europe, 8 matches, and they'll be looking to go to the group stages. So they wouldn't be saying it within the club, but realistically, they probably want to be top of the league going into July. If they want to win the league, they probably want to have a bit of a cushion, and they're really loading their players that they have fit at the minute, and they essentially only have 11 first team players. And Stephen Bradley's talked after the match about the opportunity that it's giving some of the younger players. They, like on average, Rovers of their average age in their starting 11 is 27. Only Galway are higher than that. Last night they finished the match with average age was 22 and a half. They had 16-year-old who's just turned 16. Max Kovalevskis. I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce his name. Like, he's only just turned 16. Matthew Britton played on Friday. He's only 16. He was making me feel very old because I remember his dad, Matt Britton Senior, playing for Shamrock Rovers as well. So they're really stretched in the minute, which is difficult because they're facing into another double fixtures this weekend, away to Bows and then home to Waterford. But I think if you get 4 points from those double headers, ultimately you're doing very well. And I think if they got 4 points probably this weekend, maybe a point in Dalymount and 3 points at home to Waterford, I think that'd be a pretty good return when you look at just the sheer number of players that they have missing. On Friday night they named 7 teenagers on the bench. Someone replied back to me and said, well, Rovers are going out signing these older players and that's the profile you get. And I suppose that is the case when you have, players that are at that kind of older age. But it doesn't look like Aaron Green's that age because he looks way younger than he is. He's got 7 goals this season. That's his best return since 2020. And, he scored again last night, got those couple of great goals in Derry as well. I think he's been really, really important that he stayed fit. Conan Noonan, who's come on, he looks really good. Darren Nugent has been very good this season. People were kind of wondering what type of player he'd be like, but he's been really, really important because they're missing so many players.
Suppose, Macdara, another player that's really kind of stepped up of late is Jack Keaney as well. A goal and an assist for him last night against Drogheda. And he was kind of involved in another kind of controversial incident as well.
Yeah, there was a couple of things where, he took the wrong option. There was one where he turned right when he really should have turned left in the box and passed it to Aaron Green, who was running by him. And there was a couple of things as well. Like we mentioned the pitch in Talca last week. He was poor against Shelbourne, but really not helped by the pitch. But yeah, he's got a couple of really good headers from Dylan Watts crosses from the last 2 games, from a late one against Galway, which was crucial for them getting the point, and then it was a pretty important goal last night as well, which was the opening goal, if I have that correctly, just before halftime as well. But the bit you're mentioning there is just the sending off. So yeah, he was racing through on goal with about 20 minutes to go, and Jack Keaney behind him. And you can look at the video clip. Keaney maybe clipped Kenny's stride about 2 strides before he goes down. So it kind of does look like he goes down a bit easily. You can maybe look at the video and say he didn't clip him at all. But and Drogheda appealed it, but the appeals process for something like that, where the referee saw it, the referee was in a good position and felt it was a red card. I think they're not ones really that they're going to overturn unless there was something. But some people are maybe looking at it and going, "Oh, he wasn't touched at all, and it's ridiculous." And Kevin Doherty talking afterwards, he just said it was a mistake. He didn't pan Rob Hennessy, who was the referee. He just said, like, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. Player makes mistakes, and that for me was a mistake. And they put their €500 in, but the disciplinary committee had a look at it today, and they backed the referee.
Yeah, just my own view of it really was that I couldn't see anywhere from the footage Keaney making any contact with him, and it's very hard to tell from the particular angle that's been doing the rounds whether he clipped him or not. And the only reason I could think though for Jack Keaney to go down is if he was clipped, because having seen him playing for Sligo Rovers and knowing the kind of player he is, he's mad to score, and he was clean through. Like, Keaney wasn't getting near him. So that's the only reason I can think is, like, I couldn't understand why he went down. But even if he was clipped, he still managed to take another nearly full step or 2 before going down. So he must have felt some kind of contact in order to go down, which, I mean, to me, I didn't think there was anything in it, and certainly not enough to warrant a red card, even though Keaney was the last man. So if he does touch him, he has to go. But it was a poor decision, I thought, from what I could see of it.
Yeah, like, the thing is that it wasn't like it was early in the game where it's like he felt a clip or whatever, he felt his presence there, they're going to go down and get him sent off. Like Shamrock Rovers are 3-0 up at that point, and there was 20 minutes to go. Kevin Doherty had already made a couple of double substitutions, and the game was gone. I think from Kenny's confidence point of view, he'd probably want to go on and put the ball away in the back of the net. So, but he played a really important role last night because Rory Gaffney wasn't available. Gaffney had played against Galway, but he wasn't even part of the matchday squad last night. And I know, Gaffney, it's difficult for him to play 3 games in a week, to go back to back to back. And maybe they just felt, let's actually pull him out from this squad so that he's available for the game in Denman Park on Friday evening, where, he's scored against Bows in the past in Dalymount.
Paul, do you want to weigh in there with the red card incident? Do you think it was a red?
Yeah, I agree. With kind of what's been said already. I didn't think it was when I saw it live. I thought it was a dive. I didn't think there was any contact whatsoever, and I thought it was a dive. I saw the footage back then, and I still had the same view. And then I saw it back this morning again, just the clips that were doing the rounds, and I still had the same view. But I agree with what's said there about, why would he go down, 2 or 3 yards after? Because he was true on goal. Like he was absolutely true on goal and would have fancied his chance of scoring. So you have to assume that he was clipped, the faintest of touches, but at the speed he was going, that maybe that's all that was needed. So I know Kevin Doherty after the game last night felt that it was the wrong decision. He shouldn't have been sent off. He did sort of stress that he was going away to have a proper look at it again, but he obviously did that. And then the clubs always have until lunchtime the following day to submit their appeal. So there is a kind of a cut-off point in terms of, if you miss the lunchtime deadline, then you can't appeal it. But as you said earlier on, it's 500 quid a pop. So Drogheda obviously felt that they had grounds for complaint as such, but as we've seen with pretty much all of these cases, I think so far, a lot of these red cards are not for turning.
Yeah, and I found it interesting. I think, Macdara, you were saying off air before we move on that there hasn't been an overturned red card yet, I think, since the appeal process put in.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the last time, the only way the appeal was if it was the referee had given a second yellow to someone that he thought was a second yellow, but was only first and sending him off or something like that. Although I presume the fourth official or assistant referee would step in at that point. But yeah, I don't think any of them has been overturned. And I think it's a case of, the referee, Rob Hennessy, was well positioned there and he saw what he saw right in front of him and he made that decision. So are the disciplinary committee going to go, well, actually, no, and overturn? And they decided not to.
Donal, a quick word in Sligo then. Disappointing result in Drogheda last Friday.
Yeah, it wasn't all bad for Drogheda now over the last couple of days. They had a great win at home against the Sligo Rovers. Rovers started really well, to be fair. Will Fitzgerald getting his first goal of the season. It was a really good finish as well. Just kind of took it from inside the box with the outside of the left boot and curled it into the bottom right corner. But then Drogheda just kind of grew in stature as the game went on. And Dara Markey was absolutely outstanding once again. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the league, to be honest. He's fantastic and a great finish to equalise as well. Just put it into the top right corner from just outside the box and on 24 minutes. And it was pretty much all Drogheda then. Rovers had a lot of the ball, but weren't really creating too many chances. Jethro and Barr didn't have too many saves to make across the whole 90 minutes, and then Rovers give away a really, really silly penalty inside the first 10 minutes of the second half, and that's it then. Or I don't think it was that early in the second half, but a really silly penalty. Niall Moran just kind of lunged in on Luke Heaney, clipped the man and not the ball, and you're just putting the ball on a plate for France Pierre to score from the spot. Piero was very good as well for Drogheda, was a real handful, and Ollie Denham had a job to keep him quiet until that. But then it was like once the penalty went in, Rovers just kind of down tools really. It was really disappointing from there on out, I thought. They just didn't look like they had any of the answers to anything Drogheda were throwing at them, and then Drogheda deservedly got their the third goal, Aaron McNally coming off the bench and went on a great run. Bet two of the Rovers players got back onto his right foot and rolls a nice one into the bottom right corner and just puts the game to bed for Drogheda. And they were fully deserving of the 3 points on the night. And another, I suppose, worrying enough for Sligo Rovers, really, in the fact that we're seeing a lot of this season where they're starting games really well and they have a really good first half, and then performance just kind of dribbles out in the second half, and the game just kind of runs away on them. And with another big double header now coming up, although finally both games are at home this time, against Waterford on Friday and then St. Pat's on the bank holiday Monday, it's two very, very big games for John Russell now coming up.
How concerned are you about Sligo's form? Because look, last 5 games, no winning 5 now in the league. I know there's a couple of draws in there, but is it too early to be overly concerned, you think?
I'm not sure whether it's too early to be concerned. As you mentioned there, look, no wins in the last 5, 2 points out of the last 5 games, and conceding 3 in the last 3 away games, each of the last 3 away games. I don't think those are stats that'll have any fan particularly happy. I'd say if Rovers don't manage to pull any kind of decent results out of these 2 games that are coming up now, I think John Russell could find himself under a bit of pressure.
The other games then was Derry back to win away 2-0 against Waterford, and Damien's of Shelbourne went 1-0 against St. Pat's. Before we move on from the Parent Division, just on John Daly, Paul, I suppose Pats came into the season maybe with a bit of momentum from the Cup. I know they lost players, but they deemed to signed well. It just hasn't clicked, has it, at Pats this season so far?
No, just very inconsistent. And that kind of haunted them at times a little bit last season as well. But 11 new signings. How much leeway do you give clubs? You obviously need time for a squad to settle when you make that amount of signings, and that's fine if you're kind of planning to build a squad for maybe the next 2 or 3 years, and that that'll be the same squad that Pats go with next year. Bar 1 or 2 changes, but you can't get into that kind of Dundalk situation of the last few years where you keep just ripping things out. So Pats need to kind of decide what they want to be, in terms of are they building for a title, a proper go with the title in the next 2 or 3 years maybe. Is this kind of year 1 with this squad, and that they'll look to consolidate in the league and give it a go, but keep that squad next year and build and just improve with a couple of signings here and there. It is an awful lot of change. They've just been very inconsistent. I think defensively they've been a bit suspect at times. And then, they go and sort of come from behind to beat Shamrock Rovers in that game a few weeks ago. And then, you would think that what a brilliant sort of stepping stone that is to really drive on. Because I think when they came back from that trip to America, I think their form had sort of improved a bit. And then that Rovers win that I was talking about, come from behind win. And everything just kind of felt right for Pats, leaving Inchicore, leaving Richmond Park that night, just looking at the fans, and I think they finally felt they were getting somewhere and that things were starting to click for them. And then I think the form since then is just nosedive, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has. And obviously you're in line, obviously Pats fans aren't happy, the usual overreactions that maybe fans call the manager's head. But it's often said, and just maybe throws at the group there, I wonder this season, does the cloud of Stephen Keaney in the background, does that kind of put pressure on clubs maybe or fans think they can maybe approach him? Obviously Bowles, he was linked to Dundalk, he was heavily linked again. Do fans maybe think that he's the person to come in maybe if they sack the manager, or maybe reading too much in there?
Well, I know he was at Tallaght Stadium last night, so he's sitting up with Damien Duff and Joey O'Brien were there watching. I think, I did see reference to that Dundalk we're looking for him. I think realistically, if he's going to go to any club, it's probably Derry, because I think he feels he probably has unfinished business at Derry. Like when he left there in 2012 to come to Shamrock Rovers, if I have my years right, like Shamrock Rovers actually paid a fee to Derry City to release him. And he he kind of put a team together. I think he gets what the city's about. I think he gets the status that the club has in the city as well, and the fact that Philip already has so much money available is a very different story than if he was going to Dundalk, even under new ownership. I don't think Stephen Kenny is going to be taking a St. Patrick's Athletic job if that came available, or a Sligo Rovers job if that came available, to be honest. And just listen to, I've heard Dan McDonald talk a little bit on this, that, Kenny's looking at opportunities to manage elsewhere. Like, Paul, do you think, like, managing elsewhere, is that in the UK? Do you think maybe managing in Scandinavia, somewhere where, his experience in Europe might be really very well recognised from his time at Dundalk?
Yeah, I think that's probably a bit more likely, or, could you be looking at America, or, but certainly, maybe I wouldn't be completely convinced that Kenny will end up maybe in England at the moment. Their kind of barometer would be the Ireland job. And while there was plenty of things that, Stephen did right, look at the amount of players that he blooded and introduced, ultimately they weren't winning enough games. And that is kind of the barometer that people in England will use for a manager like Kenny, because, the League of Ireland, while a lot of clubs have kind of cottoned on to the League of Ireland here in terms of being able to unearth good players for a relative pittance, there aren't too many managers who are being snapped up, despite having decent coaches and decent head coaches here. So Kenny probably wouldn't be judged on his body of work from the League of Ireland and European successes with Dundalk. It was good enough to get him the Ireland job, but would it be good enough to get him the Lincoln City job? Probably not. There's so sort of high stakes in England at the moment in terms of just the money floating between all those divisions that clubs don't necessarily take wild punts anymore. So yeah, Stephen's been linked with every job in the country in the last few weeks. Between Dundalk and Bows, and you'd hear him linked with Pats and Derry, and that's probably going to continue because he is turning up at games. He's also turning it up at a lot of Dundalk games because his son plays for Dundalk. So Stephen's going to be a presence around the league. He lives in the country. But where do I think he'll end up? Honestly, I have no idea. I agree with you in terms of the League of Ireland. If in a year's time you told me he'd be managing in the League of Ireland and guessed the club he'll be managing, I probably would have thought Derry City, but only not particularly because I think Rory Higgins is under any kind of threat. I don't think all Derry City fans are loving the job that he's doing at the moment, but they are still second in the table and there's a long way to go. So I don't think there's any availability in any job up there for the time being, but just his historical connection with the club and the city. It seems in a sort of fantasy land to be the ideal fit, but where he'll actually resurface, I honestly don't know. I know people close to him would be of the opinion that he would like to kind of try something maybe outside of the country. Again, he had his time in Scotland. I don't personally see it being England, but what do I know? But could you, if someone told me in a year's time that it wasn't Derry City Stephen Kenny was managing, but he was managing a club in Sweden or he was managing a club in Belgium, yeah, I could probably see that.
I suppose Thomas Stephen Kenny kind of segues into what we're going to chat about next, and that's the FEI. I suppose, Paul, last time we spoke, there was a CEO, there was no manager. Now there's no CEO and there's no manager. So where do you want to start? We start with the Jonathan Hill. Was that, I suppose it wasn't a shock maybe he was going to leave his post, but were you shocked by the announcement that it came so sudden after the Oireachtas committee, or where do you see the Hill news?
Yeah, like it kind of felt like, the day it was announced, it kind of felt dramatic. But I think there were enough kind of indications after the Oireachtas. The Oireachtas hearing in February was so damaging for him. On the greater scheme of things, in terms of offences a CEO could make, it's probably way down the ladder in terms of the figures involved and all this, that type of thing. But it was just a really poor kind of explanation laced with holes, laced with sort of non-answers, the redacted statements in the Oireachtas, and just almost a sense of kind of arrogance about the whole thing in terms of how it was dealt with, So his reputation was, I think everyone agrees that his reputation took a right battering that day. And I think once Paul Cook, and that was, late February, I think once Paul Cook in that Oireachtas hearing said that his confidence in Hill had been challenged by the events, I think the quote was, I don't think there was any coming back from that at all. Then around the March internationals, I think Mark Tye and Dan McDonnell had a story in and around the Belgium and Switzerland games that, the Hill's future was very much on the line. Now, that wouldn't have come as a major shock. There was a board meeting at the time and his future was discussed, and he kind of lived on as such, or not quite a stay of execution, but he kind of just carried on as such. And then there were rumblings that the announcement that he left, I'm pretty sure it came on a Monday, and there had been rumours pretty much since the Friday evening. I remember being at a League of Ireland game in Talca, and there were certainly rumours going around that night that something might have been happening in the background, and not solid enough that anybody could come out and definitively write that a story that this was on the verge of happening. But when it was announced on the Monday, I suppose that initial kind of reaction to it was, wow, okay, that is a bit of a surprise, but it's not really a surprise, if you know what I mean. It was just probably the dramatic kind of hit of the instant news. But yeah, today actually, as we're talking on Tuesday, April the 30th, is technically Jonathan Hill's last day as the CEO of the FAI. But of course, he's been on holiday leave for the last couple of weeks, which is slightly ironic in itself. So he hasn't been involved in any day-to-day sort of stuff since that statement came out. And today is officially his last day.
Going by their track record the last, say, 6 months, 7 months now since Stephen Kenny's been removed from his post, or not renewed rather, will we see a CEO before the end of the year, or do you think maybe that'll be priority now before we even find the manager? Like, is that now going to take precedence over finding the first team manager to manage the national team?
The honest answer is I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I don't know. I can't remember the how it was phrased in the press release, but a bit like the kind of constant message that we're getting from the FAI that the managerial hunt is a thorough and robust process. There was sort of similar language used in the press release announcing Jonathan Hill's departure, that the search for a new CEO would be thorough and robust. They weren't actually the words they used, but it was along a similar sentiment, So you kind of have an association now with an interim manager, an interim CEO. I don't know. I really don't know where you start. I don't know how quickly they're going to go about sourcing a new CEO. Or I don't know. I wrote a piece at the time because I was interested in and around when Hill left, that how would it affect the managerial hunt, because Hill was central to it, while Mark Canham is kind of driving it as the director of football. Jonathan Hill and Packy Bonner have been central to this managerial hunt. And could the association stand over an appointment made by a CEO who's now out the door? How far do they have to wind things back? How close were they ever to getting anybody? Honest to God, it's just a saga at this stage. It is ridiculous. And Mark Canham came out with that kind of in-house FAI TV interview that we all got wind was coming, and interesting that they chose to do an in-house version with a member of FAI staff posing the questions rather than fronting up and doing an actual press conference and asking and answering some maybe alternative questions that FAI employees wouldn't be asking the FAI director of football. But it doesn't look like we're going to get any kind of explanation like that, and it's just going to rumble on now for the summer and can kick down the road again. And John O'Shea back in as interim manager for the 2 games in June, which is interesting in itself, because John's in a funny position because he has made it clear publicly and privately, but certainly publicly, that he would like to be the next permanent manager of the Ireland team. At the same time, he also knows that he doesn't have the experience. So what does he do when, 2 weeks ago, before they came calling to see would he take on the June games, because he has them over a barrel in a way, because they know the FAI need an interim manager, and they know that he wants the job, and like he can't be seen to be kind of the FAI's doormat either, you know what I mean? So there's a bit of a decision there for him, but I think John would probably, 118 caps. I think he'd be the type of character that wouldn't ever say no to his country when asked. And look, he is a manager. He wants to be a manager, but he does lack experience. And this is 2 more games under his belt come June. It'd be interesting to see what happens if he does well in them.
I think he should leave him in it.
Yeah,
Leave him there. I don't see any harm in putting him there. Obviously, the lack of experience is obviously a huge thing, but like he clearly wants to do it. There doesn't seem to be any other candidate that wants to do it. Like the search has been going on, Paul, as you said, it's been going on for ages, and it looks like it's going to rumble on now for the whole summer. And if whether or not O'Shea does a good job, I think I'd be in favour of leaving him there to take the job, and we might as well give it to him now at this stage, because it just has been going on so long. It just needs to be put to bed, really. So I don't see the harm in just making the appointment permanent, as opposed to extending this temporary thing for 2 games in every 3 or 4 months or so. Like we've mentioned, as you said, Paul, he's not a man to say no to his country with 118 caps. Like, so he clearly gets what it takes to be an Ireland manager. He cares enough to do it, and of course, it'll be a great feather in his cap to be the manager of his country. But honestly, I would have no opposition in leaving him there as the permanent manager.
To play, like just purely to play, because I can see those points that you're making, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with all of them, considering some of the names that have been touted for the job. Like if Lee Carsley was available, I would probably take Lee Carsley, but I would have John O'Shea ahead of some of the names that have been mentioned. But just to play devil's advocate, like one of the criticisms that was leveled against Stephen Kenny was that he wasn't experienced enough. Like this is a guy who's managed 50 odd games in Europe or whatever it is, won league titles there. John O'Shea picked a team for the first time in his life against Belgium. So he's got 118 more caps for Ireland than Stephen Kenny has. And this isn't me saying they should have left Stephen Kenny in charge. I was in favour of Stephen Kenny being the Ireland manager, and I certainly, for the first 2 years of it, thought it was worth sticking with. I think by the end of it, I think it was probably a fair enough call that he had his time. It didn't quite work, and I don't think there's any kind of shame in that either. But people did point fingers and say, well, this guy isn't experienced enough to make tactical changes in the middle of matches. John O'Shea, absolutely decorated career, one of our greatest ever players. But as I said, he's picked 2 teams in his life, so it's just that little sort of bit of devil's advocate sort of play there.
Yeah, do you remember what you said the first episode of the 2024 podcast season?
No, that we wouldn't have a manager come the Euros, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if I remember right, you said, what I'd like to see this year in tongue in cheek would be an Irish manager to be appointed. And I genuinely assumed there would be an Irish manager appointed by the 30th of April as we go 2.5 months into the podcast year. But anyway,
yeah, like it's depressing, because I said, I'm like, I just think it's really, really embarrassing. They've kind of essentially brought the game into disrepute almost, where the situation is at the minute. Just one thought on the CEO, like they've appointed David Carell as interim CEO, and just looking at his CV, it looks quite good. He's a Mayo man. It's funny. I'm looking at the Connacht Telegraph, which is that the Connacht Telegraph, and it's like David Carell, son of Mr. and Mrs. Eamon Carell, Pontoon Drive, Castlebar, is set to be named as interim CEO of FAI. Of the FAI. It's all about your location. But in terms of his CV in the game, he had a key position with the English FA. He was their head of business management. He was part of their 2030 FIFA World Cup bid feasibility. They that didn't quite work out. But anyway, and has been kind of involved in Olympics and stuff. So he's someone who has bringing good international experience to the role. And the talk internally is that he's very, very well regarded. But I think the fact that Hill probably wasn't, and some of the stuff about Hill not being in Ireland, and there was absentee landlord term being bandied around as well. So whether they appoint actually David Carroll as a full-time CEO, like ultimately you want someone who's running a business that has, he's the CEO in charge of X number of employees, that has a turnover of X amount. It's quite a political job. It'll become even more important, I think, in the next 12 months. A lot of talk about funding for football in Ireland. We're less than 12 months away from a general election. So this current government aren't going to suddenly put X million behind a League of Ireland. But what parties will be doing, they'll be pulling together their election manifestos. Whoever then gets to go into government will pull together a programme for government. That programme for government will be based on things that are in the election manifesto, and generally what's in the programme for government is installed. So this current government talked about putting in a gambling regulator, and that they've done that. And the pressure at the minute is to make sure that when the election comes around, the general election comes around, that football is a part of that, and that people are asking their TDs. Like I even saw former GA president Sean Kelly, who's running for Fine Gael in Europe. He has a 3-minute video in the League of Ireland. So whoever is the new CEO come next year, when there's new government formed, when they're really the purse strings, they'll be pushing to get this money available with the new government coming in. It's going to be even more important. And that's the type of individual they need to get. And hopefully by then, when we've had that general election, we'll also have a men's senior manager as well.
Is it it's only the Labour Party really that's come out with actually kind of in the manifesto they're going to back the League of Ireland, or am I wrong there? They're really the only political party.
I think now I'll declare my interest in terms of my Labour Party allegiances in Aon O'Riordan. I think people will generally know his bona fides in terms of Irish football, but I think, to be fair, Chris Andrews and Sinn Féin has been quite strong on that as well. So but Micheál Martin was off the ball, what was it, 2 years ago, talking about funding of the academy. So I think it will become more of an issue for the reasons why we've seen where we are at the minute, and the presentation that Will Clark and Shane Robinson made last week in terms of the academies, the report that Mark Hannon put together in the development and the funding model. There is the funding scheme for large infrastructure schemes is open for applications at the minute, and the FAI are encouraging their organisations to put things in as well. So I think football and League of Ireland football is at the forefront of politics that we've never seen before. And I think last year was the first time that it was actually debated in the House, and there was actually discussed in the chamber. So I think we can kind of push that on. Yeah, I'll be certainly poring over the election manifestos when they come out ahead of the election, just to see what the various parties have put in place.
Paul, just want to move on from John O'Shea and the wrap up the episode. No Brian Kerr and his backroom staff this time around?
No, he seems to, certainly the FAI press statement said that he had prior personal and professional engagements in and around that sort of June time. So no, he won't be involved.
Just a quick one for you then as well. Sefrin's come to town to meet the Irish government. Speaking of politicians.
Yeah, and I think the FAI put this out themselves yesterday. It's all tied in with the Europa League final being in Dublin at the Aviva Stadium on the 22nd of May, I think it is, Wednesday, 22nd of May. So, Sefrin will obviously be at that game, but he'll be in Dublin for a fair bit of ceremonial stuff in and around it. But the FAI put out a statement yesterday. They put out there, there was a photograph in the statement of Paul Cook, the FAI president, over in Nyon in Switzerland at UEFA headquarters, shaking hands with Sefrin. And according to the press release, that Cook brought Sefrin up to speed on kind of the various strategic and facility plans that the FAI have launched over the last while. That really good documents, certainly on the face of it, and hugely promising stuff. But as ever with anything in life, and particularly in Irish football, it's all about the money. And we spoke earlier about the Oireachtas hearing with Jonathan Hill and how damaging that was, and how much it seems to have set things back, because they launched this document last year, and just unless there's major talks going on in the background that we're not aware of, it just really seems to have kind of just stalled a little bit, So I don't think Sefrin, coming over to talk to some of the government leaders, was the phrase in the press release. I don't see how that can do any harm. If you have the head of European football's governing body coming over to press the flesh with a few of the politicians that may or may not open the purse strings, and particularly, as Macdara was saying there, with an election on the horizon at some point over the next year, this could become an election issue, because certainly at that Will Clark and Shane Robinson briefing, I actually can't remember whether it was Will or Shane who said it, but they were talking about having 350,000 kind of between registered and unregistered football players at all levels in our country, from grassroots all the way through. That's a hell of a lot of votes. So it could become political, but I don't see how Sefrin coming to Dublin to meet a few of these politicians is going to be any bad thing. And certainly, social media is never the best sort of gauge of things at times, because it can be such a cesspit. But certainly the reaction yesterday I saw on social media to the announcement that Sefrin would be meeting with politicians certainly seemed to be positive, and quite a few people suggesting that it may be no bad thing, and trying to get things accelerating down the line a little bit.
Yeah, and I suppose you kind of mentioned at the top of the episode about Oriel Park, and I think you did an article on that PFEI survey that came out about the facilities narrative, and that's the elephant in the room really, is the facilities here aren't up to scratch, never mind the grassroots level, just in terms of the professional game. And just the facilities are they're not good enough, in simple terms, and the way the game is growing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of posturing, I think, as well, from politicians who will jump on the bandwagon for these types of things as well, in terms of there's a lot of people beating the drum now about needing an improvement in our facilities and needing funding. And you will get a handful of politicians coming out and releasing videos and sending press releases sort of saying this is all a great thing, and that's fine, but let's sort of back it up a little bit as well, because they can be big bandwagoners too, so I think it's just important that everybody in Irish football, you reach a point where you're kind of, particularly, and I can only speak from my what I do in terms of my job as a football journalist, you end up talking to managers and players and FAI people, and you do end up interviewing them quite a lot about the need for funding, the need for this, the need for that. And there can be a little bit of fatigue in that as well, in that you're writing more stories on a similar theme, and some managers and some players might seem a little bit fatigued even talking about it. But I think everybody agrees that you have to get over that. You have to just keep recycling this news cycle all the time, because it'd be very easy just to do what's happened in the past and just, nothing, there's no movement on it. Let's down tools and, raise your eyes to heaven and throw your hands up in the air. But I think it's so important just relentless beating of the drum in the year that's potentially in it with an election on the way.
Before we go, just a quick word to you, Macdara. I can't finish the episode out chatting to you about the Dublin Derby coming this Friday night. Your thoughts ahead of the game? Yeah, it's a big game because, for all the Bohemians have changed their manager in the year, they're right just behind Shamrock Rovers. So, coming into, mentioned earlier on that it is a double header game, but yeah, it's a sold out match at Dalymount Park. Like nearly all of them are this year. 450 tickets, I think Shamrock Rovers got for the mono stand, and it'll be the games that'll be of wide interest in terms of the title race, but also as we kind of said before, it is known as the Dublin
the Dublin Derby. It's the one that probably people kind of look out for. Now, the last time in Tala, Rovers had a pretty comprehensive win over Bohemians, and they'll be smarting from that. I think it was the 3 second half goals. Last year, Rovers beat both 3 times. I think the one in Dalymount Park, they were 2-0 up, and then were coasting, and both came back to draw 2-2. So Rovers' recent record is pretty good against Bohemians, but I'm sure Alan Reynolds will have them well teed up for this, and they're coming in with a recent, a good run of form.
Are you on the game in your journalistic capacity or as a fan?
I've got one of the 450 tickets, so yeah, I'm a member at Shamrock Rovers. So they think they sold. You got to notice 24 hours ahead of time, and they went and sell at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday last week. I think it was. I think they were all sold out in 11 minutes. I think it was, and everyone's looking for spares, and I can see there's Bohemian fans looking for spares in their home ends as well, behind the goal and in the Jody stand.
Paul, are you also going in the journalistic capacity of the game at Dalymount Park on Friday?
Sorry, yeah, I'll be at that game, and at Dalymount on Friday and Derry Shells on Monday.
Donal, covering again this weekend, Waterford.
Yeah, on commentary for LYTV this Friday, and then again for Ocean FM on Monday when Pats come to town. So 2 big games in the showgrounds, as I said earlier on.
Last thing, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Cheers, lads.
Thank you, lads. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. And
before we go, just a quick run through the fixtures in the SSE Airtricity League. Starting with the Premier Division, as mentioned before, Bohemians face Shamrock Rovers in the Dublin Derby, Galway United against Derry City, St Patrick's against Drogheda United, Dundalk Shelburne, and Sligo Rovers Waterford, all on Friday. In the first division, we have UCD Longford Town, Finn Harps Street United, Cove Ramblers Bray, Wexford Athlone Town, and Kerry Cork, all on Friday also. Finally, in the Women's Premier Division, we have Shells Bowls, Shamrock Rovers Peamount, big game there on Saturday night, Galway United DLR Waves, Wexford Youth Sligo, and Cork City Tree, all on Saturday. Oisin Lang will be back with the Voice Notes podcast in your podcast feeds roughly around Saturday morning. Thanks to Paul, thanks to Macdara, thanks to Donal, thanks to you for listening, and we'll chat to you all next week.